Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our 2 games is 2017's What Remains of Edith Finch, an exploration of a cursed family's home as the player learns about each member's death through playable mini-experiences.
Following that is a game about the loneliness of the woods, and how for some people, that might be seen as an escape. 2016's Firewatch.
It is Walking Simulator Week. And I know that's putting the genre, and some people see it as a pejorative, fine. So let's say first-person narrative adventures with big emotional hooks in there. I feel like I'm trying to remember which one of us brought up doing this game this week first, but when one did this game, like, oh, well, we got to talk about this game in comparison.
I believe it was I put down Firewatch, and then you came up with doing Edith Finch at the same time from there.
And I feel like another one would have been like, what about Gone Home? The indie that really popularized this genre. And maybe we might get to that sometime. But these were games that were a little more recent, a little fresher in our memories. Certain musical cues are especially powerful in each of these games. So I'm really excited to talk about them. It feels like games that maybe not as many people have played, or even to think about their soundtracks, but we'll give it a go. Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I am doing pretty all right. I haven't really been playing a lot of games recently, especially after graduating, which is kind of weird. I did stream Gorogoa on Nintendo World Report a couple of days ago at time of recording. It's a very interesting little puzzle game. Had a good time with it. It's very weird, but kind of neat.
I played these 2 games.
Hey!
What Remains of Edith Finch and Firewatch. So I'm all fresh up, ready to talk about them. But first, let's get to talking about the composer follow-up news. We'd like to follow the headlines of the different composers that we've talked about on the show over the past year and change. Almost a year and a half. Wow, that's kind of crazy to think about. But they're still doing great work, and we'd like to talk about that work. Such as Akira Yamaoka is doing something Silent Hill related. One of the big headlines of the week is that Dead by Daylight is becoming the Super Smash Brothers of horror game franchises in a way, with different crossovers from all over the place. In June, they will be getting Silent Hill themed content. Yes, approved by Konami. And Akira Yamaoka's doing like a take on the Dead by Daylight theme in like his Silent Hill style. So Silent Hill kind of lives?
Kind of. This is the most excited I've been about a Silent Hill thing and it's, for anybody that does not know, Dead by Daylight is an asynchronous multiplayer game where one person plays the killer and 4 people play the survivors, and the survivors try to escape and the killer tries to kill, blah blah blah. And they have gotten a lot of like licenses, so like a bunch of slasher people are in that game, like Leatherface, you got Michael Myers, you got your Freddy Krueger, etc., etc. And the latest killer is Pyramid Head, who comes with a Midwich Elementary stage, which is from Silent Hill 1, and also comes with the playable survivor, Heather Mason, though they call her Cheryl Mason because, much like Super Smash Brothers, they do not care about spoilers. In other news relating to last week, if you have any interest in Shantae and the Pirate's Curse and you happen to have Xbox Live games with gold, well, it's free in June 2020 for Xbox Live games with gold. If I didn't convince you last week that Shantae is great, I haven't had a chance to play Seven Sirens yet because I'll be doing it tomorrow at time of release on stream because I'm a fool and committed to doing that. But it sounds like it's pretty good, and if you need a taste of the Shantae formula, Pirate's Curse is definitely the way to go. And hey, free is a pretty good price.
It is. I'm going to have to grab that for my Xbox library. Looks like Yoko Shimomura has a YouTube channel, and she is uploading piano arrangements of some of her famous pieces to the platform. There's one that like she plays herself, but some of her cohorts are then playing some of the others. But it's really cool, and I think deserves a little love.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch any of them, but you know me. Piano arrangements are my jam. And if it's Yoko Shimomura, that's even more my jam. It couldn't get more my jam than that. And then, finally, the Final Fantasy VII Remake official soundtrack is now available for purchase. It is not available for streaming yet on any streaming service, as far as I can tell, but you can buy a physical 8-disc collection on Square Enix's website, as well as purchase it digitally on Apple Music, Google Play, and Amazon Music. We haven't heard anything about streaming yet, but I can only hope soon.
I'm sure someone will put it on YouTube. The question will be, is it the actual official source? But speaking of the official source, really getting good publicity and publication with their new soundtrack, the Tetris Effect soundtrack, the official soundtrack, is now out everywhere. Same places for purchase. Not the Square Enix website, of course, but Apple Music, Google Play, Amazon Music. But it's also streaming on Hydalic's YouTube channel. And it's also available on Enhance's Bandcamp page and Spotify. That's right, Tetris Effect is going on the Spotify playlist for original Soundchat, and that's great.
It's already on there, actually. At time of recording, I put it on there yesterday, so enjoy that. I listened to Yours Forever like 7 times yesterday on loop in a row, so definitely getting some use out of that. And lastly, Hydrogen by Moon, which you might remember as something Peter talked about a couple weeks ago for Hotline Miami. It was featured in a recent State of Play, not as part of Hotline Miami, but part of The Last of Us Part 2, where a guard playing Evita is killed by Ellie. And it's implying that she was probably playing Hotline Miami on that Vita.
Such a cool little reference, and not only to have the Vita in there, right? But for those musically inclined folk to hear, like, oh, that's the thump of Hydrogen through those little tinny speakers. Such a good call. I'm really looking forward to The Last of Us Part 2, so you may hear me talking about where I am in subsequent weeks on this show. Let's get to talking about the first of our 2 walking simulators this week. And I'll start by talking about what remains of Edith Finch. Now, on episode 45 of this show, I was back around in November of 2019, we talked about the developer Giant Sparrow and their game, The Unfinished Swan. It's the game where it's a white world and you have to throw black globs of paint, and that's kind of how it starts, and you kind of create that world from there. It's more than that, but that's kind of where it starts. This is Giant Sparrow's follow-up project. So Unfinished Swan was 2012. This came out in 2017. Specifically, What Remains of Edith Finch released for PS4 and PC on April 25th, 2017. Xbox One got a version on July 19th, 2017. And then it took a couple years for the game to come to Nintendo Switch on July 4th, 2019. It is developed by Giant Sparrow and published by Annapurna Interactive. What Remains of Edith Finch is a first-person narrative adventure where you explore the rooms of a house to discover these memorial shrines for deceased members of the Finch family. And by discovering these shrines, and through Edith's narration, you're able to play these small little vignettes, these mini experiences that show how each family member died. And it helps you learn about each person, as well as fill in the family tree that is being populated on the pause menu. So it's a really interesting thing where you're trying these completely different little mini experiences, but you always know that the character in question is going to die at the end. The question is, how did that happen? So the story is based on the character known as Edith Finch making a return visit to Orcas Island off the coast of Washington State to the house where she grew up. It's been deserted and it's left full of memories. See, the Finches have believed for generations that they are cursed, where only one child in the family, in the generation, will be able to carry on the lineage, while the others will meet horrible deaths. And these deaths have brought such shame to the family that the rooms of the children who have passed on have had their doors sealed. However, there are other ways to still access their rooms. So Edith wants to find out the truth about what happened to her ancestors and collect all these stories together in a single place, her journal. So, how did the Finches meet their cruel ends, and what is so special about Edith's journal? Joe, here's what I'll ask you. What are your experiences with What Remains of Edith Finch?
I love this game. I've played it upwards of 3 times now, watched it once, and personally played it twice. Watched it twice, personally played it twice. Oh, man. I absolutely adore it. I think it's one of the best examples of the quote-unquote walking sims that there is.
Mm-hmm.
It's got enough variety to keep things interesting throughout, and it's just a very interesting little lore to climb through as you go. And it's not very long either. It's like 2-3 hours long.
2. Like, it's a hard 2 hours. Some people may be slightly slower, slightly faster, but it's pretty locked in at 2 hours if you were able to follow these text clues. Yeah, this game is brilliant, honestly. I've played it twice now, just once in this past week, but I had played it about a year or so ago. And yeah, it's fascinating. I think it moves very quickly because all of the different things that you're doing keeps it fresh, keeps it moving. You're exploring this space, and yeah, if you get lost, I mean, it's a game where you have this narration that Edith Finch is saying, and it appears in the world, and like it's kind of your clue of like that's where you need to go. If you're seeing text, it's like I kind of go in that direction. It's a really, really smart way of helping the navigation along. But there are just these really cool like callbacks to help explore the whole. It's not even a world; like it's just a house, and yet it feels like a big character all on its own. Yeah, so many different experiences to have with these vignettes. I love this game. I'm really excited to talk about it with you, especially since you enjoy it so much as well.
I'm very excited to learn about the development of this game because I've never looked into it.
Oh, it's interesting. It is definitely interesting and a great composer story as well. So it starts with the creative director, Ian Dallas, describing wanting to create an experience that is, quote, an interactive experience that evokes what it feels like to have a moment of finding something beautiful, yet overwhelming. It's inspired by his own experience of being a scuba diver in Washington State, and while scuba diving, seeing the ocean fall off into darkness in the distance. So this game actually started conceptually as a scuba diving game. And you think of Abzu, and well, that was a whole different thing, but What Remains of Edith Finch had scuba roots. But the team struggled with this concept until Ian Dallas came up with this idea of a shark falling into a forest with a child uttering the line, and suddenly I was a shark.
Yes!
Which just sparked this idea of moving into these strange, unnatural scenarios. Like Joe, those who have played the game before may recognize this as something that is in the first vignette, where the character is changing forms into these different animals and figures and creatures.
And suddenly she's a shark. I can't believe that's the moment that caused the whole game to be the way it is. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Fantastic. So the development then became about coming up with these scenarios that involved, quote, giving the player something interesting to watch or do but knowing that their characters were about to die. And so it's like, come up with all these different brainstorming devices and just ideas, but you needed something to ultimately frame the whole thing together. Because you can't just have these sudden, random, disjointed experience without an overall through line. Initially, the team was considering something like the Canterbury Tales, but set in a high school. But ultimately, the idea of a cursed family, a la 100 Years of Solitude, ultimately appealed more. So you needed some place for this to take place in, and you have the house. And for the house itself, Dallas stated that they had 3 words that they worked from: sublime, intimate, and murky. They wanted to make the house feel like a natural force. Quote, "It begins to look almost like the bark of a tree, something that has an order to it, but it's too chaotic for us to be able to follow." And it has all these secret passageways and all these different little contraptions to it. So yeah, it definitely becomes like a character. Multiple levels to it, little towers, bridges, things that open up to have you go on the outside and walk along the side of the house and enter through another window because the main doors are sealed off. It's super fascinating. The game was actually originally titled The Nightmares of Edith Finch, because these vignettes were really leaning into horror, and the team didn't want to make a horror game. So they ultimately backed off, and the deaths in these mini experiences end up being a little more open-ended, kind of leaving the players wondering if they're actually grounded in any reality. It's super interesting, and I'll give you a couple examples here if you have played the game before. It's also interesting to see like how some of these experiences changed ultimately to their final version. So there's one character named Walter who lives in a bunker underground, and in the game, like, he has this routine where he just eats peaches every day at noon for years and years and years. Well, apparently the very ending was the only thing that was kept of the original concept, because Walter originally, with like the main pitch, was he was going paranoid from these statues moving while he wasn't looking at them, like Doctor Who's Weeping Angels. And then he'd find out like he's part of this big train set and there's an invisible hand moving the pieces around. And so he just becomes paranoid and has to leave the bunker. There's also Edie, who's one of the older figures in the game. And her original story was apparently that she was refusing to leave the family home despite a forest fire threat approaching the home. And this is taking place in the 1980s. So they wanted to have like an in-universe Weird Al parody song that would play throughout most of the experience and actually get Weird Al to do it. But they had this idea too late in development and it wasn't able to be implemented. And that's why Edie has her story kind of shoehorned in at the end the way she does.
I do know that this the forest fire thing does come up when you go into Edie's room. You can find pictures and like articles that are about how that happened. There was a forest fire threat and Edie was like, "I'm not leaving." But she didn't die to that, obviously.
Yeah. They wanted to make that a full playable thing. So development on the game started in 2013 after the Unfinished Swan released in 2012. And the game was revealed in December 2014 at that year's PlayStation Experience. It was revealed as a game that was intended to be published by Sony Interactive Entertainment Santa Monica Studios. But Sony eventually cut back monetary support for indie titles, or like shifted away from indies. And so Edith Finch found itself on the chopping block. However, there were former Santa Monica employees who had just left Santa Monica to establish Annapurna Interactive. And so they saw an opportunity because there were several of them that were in contact with Giant Sparrow on a daily basis while they were at Santa Monica. So Annapurna picked up the publishing rights to the game, gave them more time to develop it, and ultimately had a release in 2017. In the credits, there are playtesters that are actually credited. And if you go through, there are some notable names in there, including Sam Barlow, Neil Druckmann, Greg Kasavin, Seth Killian, Lucas Pope, and our composer of Firewatch, Chris Remo.
Hey.
So that's pretty neat that they got such prominent people to play. I think even Genova Chen also got to play, test it. Robin Heineke. Like, there are some pretty great names there, actually. The game was reviewed rather well, in the high 80s and low 90s, depending on the platform, wherever you look. I think some people, if they were a little more critical, maybe they thought like some of the emotional hits didn't land as well for them. But it's certainly quite an accomplishment, especially within like the 2-hour runtime of the game. It just has you doing so many things, and there's a really nice emotional punch at the end. Like, it's super great experience. I highly recommend it, and Joe, obviously you do too. And the game was awarded rather well, actually. What Remains of Edith Finch won Best Game at the BAFTAs for that year, which, when you consider games that came out in 2017, wow, that was a bold choice for them. But honestly, it was nominated for 6 other categories, including Best Music at the BAFTAs, so it was certainly a darling there. It won Best Narrative at the Game Awards, the Developer's Choice Awards, and the South by Southwest Awards, where the Best Narrative was also a nomination at the DICE Awards. So, a game that is well regarded for its narrative. The music is also a standout, but like, this is a finely tuned, crafted first-person narrative experience that is just, it's so tight and right there. It's so good.
I think that another theme we could draw for this week is games that were nominated or won a lot of awards. Because we'll see when we get to Firewatch. Same hat.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not a game with much of a legacy. Like, we don't know what Giant Sparrow's next project is, and it's not anything that's being pulled in fighting games. Let's just say that much. When it comes to that soundtrack, I think it's important to note that also both of these games like are big on the natural sound, the environment, but then the music comes in at just the right time. And not all of the tracks are super memorable, but they establish a mood. And especially when it comes to the vignettes of What Remains of Edith Finch here. Well, let's get talking about it. The composer for What Remains of Edith Finch is Jeff Russo. Jeff Russo was born on August 31st, 1969, and he is most famous for being one of the 2 founding members of the rock band Tonic. Tonic is known for hits like If You Could Only See and Take Me As I Am. So, yeah, when it comes to a song like If You Could Only See the Way She Loves Me, like, that's Tonic. But Russo is the guitarist for the band, so let's point that out. He's not the vocalist. He is also a founding member of the acoustic rock band Low Stars. Jeff Russo also has a prominent composing career in television. He won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Music Composition for a limited series, movie, or special for his work on the TV series Fargo. Tonic, though, meanwhile, was also nominated for 2 Grammys for Best Rock Album and Best Rock Performance by a Group with Vocal in 2002. Variety magazine wrote that, quote, Jeff Russo understands how music can affect an audience. When music is employed, he sees it as an enhancement to character development and is careful to create music that subtly flows with the action and visuals of the scene. I think he put it really well in an interview about What Remains of Edith Finch, though, where he says, quote, too many times people use music as a band-aid. But if you're making a show of real quality, more times than not, you don't need to use music in that way. So I think that's the perfect kind of illustration of like, yeah, especially for these kind of first-person narrative experiences, you don't need music all the time. But when it's put at just the right moments, it definitely enhances the experience. He is married to Nina Gordon, who's one of the original guitarists and vocalists of the band Veruca Salt, and they have 2 kids together. You can follow him on Twitter at Jefferson Russo. When it comes to video games, Jeff Russo, it's What Remains of Edith Finch, and then he went and did the long shot campaign in Madden NFL 18, which was like the standout of the Madden game that year, honestly. But his TV credits are impressive. Just as a sampling, there's Fargo, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, The Umbrella Academy, Legion, Altered Carbon, The Night of, Power, Counterpart, Lucifer. I mean, it goes on, but it's super impressive. And he's also been delving into film with some recent installments such as Lucy in the Sky, Mile 22, and Lizzie. Not too many films that I have heard of personally, but that TV discography is impressive. There wasn't a whole lot when it came to What Remains of Edith Finch historical development research, because it was Jeff Russo's first video game project. And so he's kind of going into it fresh, and he considered himself not much of a gamer. But in this sense, when he got to meet with Sony when it was a Santa Monica Studios project at the time, approaching it like a cinematic story really worked for this game, actually. You still were working in cues and these different little stems here and there, but really thinking of it like a movie experience really helped. And it was really personal for Russo, too, because he lost his father at 12, and in general he says he likes to write from a dark place. But when it comes to someone like his father and like that kind of connection, he said, stories are all I have. So it kind of was a little personal for him to be able to kind of pull on those family story threads, especially with a character like Edith Finch. And it was her theme that she really started with and went from there. So what does this game sound like? Let's get into the 5 critical tracks. And yeah, let's start with that first song, Edith's theme. I feel like if there's one music cue you have to remember from like the original music in this game, it's this piano part here. This da 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 da. Like that's gonna be the one thing you hear, and it's like, oh yeah, Edith Finch. Like that's Edith's theme. That's like representing like what she's going through as she's experiencing all these different family stories. Sometimes even as she's exploring the house, like key moments come up and you're going to hear that little leitmotif come in. So yeah, it's the simple little piano cue, and it's really important to the game, I think.
I also believe that piano cue plays when you pause.
Yes. So yeah, when you're seeing the family tree.
It's not the full song, but the piano cue itself does play when you are on the pause menu with that family tree there. Yeah, this is a very nice piece. I wouldn't have been able to name it off the top of my head. I haven't actually listened to this game's soundtrack all that much. So I didn't know, like, oh, what does Edith's theme sound like? And then it started playing on my computer. I was like, oh, yeah, no, I remember this one. Because you hear it a lot.
Yeah, this is the song for this game. Now, granted, there are other themes that come up that you may tie more if you've played this game, and it may resonate with certain memories, but when it comes to like the main theme of the game, it's definitely this one.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 on the critical 5. Let's go with something a little different. This is Calvin's Swing Set. When you're talking about different character names, you are delving into their vignettes of their death. And when it comes to the swing set, as I discovered, if you are motion sick, this is a rough one for the motion sickness there, because Calvin fancied himself someone who wanted to go to space and wanted to fly. And so how do you do that with, simple essentials? Well, you have a swing set and you see how high you can go on the swing. So it makes sense that you have this kind of repeating building motion. The higher you get on the swings, the louder it builds until the ultimate crescendo when it becomes almost too dramatic, but it's such a good swell. It's one of the earliest, I think it's like the second,
I believe so.
Sort of experience that you have there, because Molly's first and then it's Calvin. So it's a powerful take really early on, and great music to go along with it, especially the big moment.
I think Calvin goes the hardest, at least in terms of gameplay, where it's just like, no, this is more than anything like, no, you have to make it happen.
Yeah.
Chop,
yeah.
chop. Because everything else is bad, but none of it feels as you want to move on with the game, kill this child.
Yeah, you can slow down the swing if you want to, but you're eventually gonna have to build it back up with all the momentum there.
Game doesn't keep going until you have made that swing go as high as it goes. And I remember this sequence quite clearly. It is not my favorite, though my favorite is on your Critical 5. I am not usually paying attention to the music during Calvin's swing, but hearing the song in full outside of the game, I agree. Like, the dramatic swell is definitely one of those. It almost feels triumphant, which is kind of weird given the subject matter. But, it feels triumphant. In the end, Calvin did, in a sense, go to space.
He learned how to fly. The visuals are terrifying, though. It's such a big acceleration. It's definitely a powerful experience. Number 3 on the Critical 5. This is Milton's Tower. Milton is a character that in the game they talk about how he just disappeared one day. They believe he'll come back, but they'll dedicate this little tower to him. He's only gone for a little bit. He'll come back, but he disappeared under very strange circumstances. And if you're a fan of this podcast and you've been hearing our episodes and you have a good memory of what different video game songs sound like, you'd be like, that melody sounds really familiar. Well, yeah, this was composed by Jeff Russo and Joel Korelitz, who we've mentioned on the show before, because Joel Korelitz is the composer of The Unfinished Swan. See, it's such a really cool little motif where you're hearing this melody from The Unfinished Swan here in the clip, and it's because Milton was an artist and he created this little flip book where he drew a door and then he discovered he could open the door and he went into the door. And Ian Dallas confirmed that Milton left this world and became the king character in Giant Sparrow's previous work, The Unfinished Swan. It's such a cool little moment where you're entering this tower and you're like, oh, that's the key art for Unfinished Swan with the frog. Oh, there's the little logo of the king with the little mustache. Oh, the music's playing. And if you've never played the game before, I apologize if it's lost on you. But for those who have, such a cool moment.
It's a cool little throwback. I really, really like this part. It was one of those things where I immediately Googled and wait, was that supposed to be? But it also comes with an unfortunate side effect being that means that's why Edith died. Because there was still another Finch child alive in her generation.
Yes.
Oops.
Unfortunately so.
And it also means there's another Finch walking around the main character of, well, implied. I think that it's a theory. I don't remember if they ever confirmed it. it is implied that the main character of Unfinished Swan is the king's son, meaning that kid is a Finch.
Very interesting to create a universe like that across their couple of games. Number 4 on the critical track absolutely had to be here. Like, what are you thinking not including this one? It's got to be here. Number 4 is Lewis's coronation, crowning. Lewis's vignette is hands down the best one in the game, and it's not even close. Like, all I have to say for those who have played it, it's the cannery. And you're like, oh, yep,
Yeah.
that one. So I don't want to go too much into it because, like, on a gameplay controls level, it's so way and far beyond anything else you've played so far that it's brilliant. And, yeah, it's incredible. I don't want to say really anything more about it. But the music here, it's so triumphant. It's the final step in the sequence. The march is so upbeat and just ready in this moment. And it actually really fits the rhythm and the repetition of the level. God, it's so good. Lewis's cannery. Just incredible.
Yeah, it is by and far the best part of the game. And it hits real hard. Like real hard. And just, yeah, this is one of my favorite songs in the game. It's definitely my favorite sequence in the game. Like you said, there's no contest. This one's the best one. I mean, Molly's gives it a bit of a run for its money, in my opinion, just because of the shark. But yeah, it's this one. And I believe this is basically essentially the last one you play in the game.
Yeah, you go to experience Edie's story and like Dawn is kind of looped in there, but like this is the last substantial one. And it makes sense. Like it's a building of all these different ideas coming together. Yeah, and then even on the soundtrack, there are multiple Lewis tracks, but it had to be this one. Okay, let's just say it had to be this one. Not only it's the building of all the instruments together, but it's the key critical moment. So, yeah.
The way this sequence ends is just so well done. Legit, I agree. I don't want to say anything else because you should go play this. It's 2 hours long. You should go play this game and experience it for yourself.
Let's just say a lot of people in like best gaming moment of the year awards for 2017, like that was a winner, if not a nominee. So yeah, it's powerful. Wrapping up the Critical 5 here. This is the end. And so this is where all the final reveals are coming together. What has happened to Edith Finch? What's the significance with the journal? All comes together here. Great instruments that you've heard throughout the soundtrack just working here. The acoustic guitar, the piano, and then you hear vocals, which actually plays a great significance to the plot and how it's culminating. So yeah, I feel like it just puts a nice little button on the Critical 5 here. And it just leaves you at a state where it's like, yeah, again, we talked about 2 hours. Such a memorable experience overall. Definitely go play Edith Finch. However, when it comes to songs on the cutting room floor, there are a couple songs that are definitely worth mentioning, and you have them as your two. So hit me with them, Joe.
So I got two that aren't original to this game, because there are two of those, and they're kind of just in that category of, when else am I going to be able to talk about? When else are we going to be able to talk about these songs? And the first one is actually a song that made me get super excited when I heard it, and that is the Halloween theme. The song was originally by John Carpenter, and it has been licensed from the soundtrack of the 1978 film Halloween, which just so happens to be my favorite horror movie of all time. It's such a good movie, it's such a good theme. This plays specifically during Barbara's sequence as you are descending into the basement. That is also, I think, one of my favorite sequences, not just because this song shows up, but because the way it is done is so fun and so different from everything else, with the whole comic book aesthetic and all that. It's fun.
It's super cool, and yeah, she's a child actor who's famous for her scream, and there's a monster convention coming up, and she's got a boyfriend who's trying to help her get her scream back in gear. It's such a good sequence.
So you actually managed to dig up some research as to how the song ended up in the game, which is fascinating to me. Apparently, Dallas had Russo try to create a soundtrack that was similar to John Carpenter's Halloween for this section, and they had considered also asking Carpenter to narrate the section, which, if you've never played the game, the whole section is narrated by a character named Jack, he has a voice kind of like this, but better than that. Mm-hmm. But at the time that the sequence was being made, the video game voice actor strike was ongoing, which meant that it was impossible for them to actually get Carpenter involved in voicing that character. But he did agree to license the use of the theme for the sequence, and again, God, I got so excited when I heard it. It's such a cool theme.
It works. It's an all-time classic theme, and it's just yes, it's perfect.
The other one on the cutting room floor, this one was not licensed because it is public domain, but it is nevertheless a very famous piece. It is Waltz of the Flowers. This, of course, if you don't know, is a piece that was originally by Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, and it's from the Nutcracker Suite. And I also learned that while trying to figure out what I was going to say during this part, I cannot hum this song without it turning into the underwater waltz, because I'm cursed, apparently. This song plays during the Gregory Finch section, where Gregory is in the bathtub and you're controlling a jumping frog. And this one is a really dark sequence in the game. Mm-hmm. And apparently Giant Sparrow specifically brought in parents to help playtest it to make sure that they were handling it, in a sensitive manner that wasn't gonna be triggering or, insensitive, bad. If you've played the game, you know exactly what we're talking about. But this piece is great. It's a classic. The Nutcracker is a classic ballet, and fun to see it showing up.
When you're seeing things through the eyes of a child, there's all sorts of whimsy when it comes to the Nutcracker. Yeah. My two on the cutting room floor are not licensed, but they're also pretty good inclusions on the soundtrack itself. The first one is Molly's Room. And Molly is the character that gets to transform into all these different kinds of animals. And then suddenly she's a shark. And you're pressing a trigger to have the shark like flop down the hill.
That so immediate moment is exactly when me and Ben were like, oh, so this is a good game.
Yes. Almost reminded me a little bit of Tokyo Jungle in a little bit. But Molly's theme is her room in particular, Molly's room. It's the first room that you get to explore in the game. Like, you kind of have to find your way through the halls. You go through the garage, you get into the main rooms. But the first child room that you get into is Molly's. And so there's all this trepidation. There's this mystery. There's the atmosphere. And then you even have like the knocking noises in the piece. And it's just like, it gives you a little bit of a chill. Like, what am I going to discover in this house? And then you're in for an adventure, certainly. The second one on the Critical 5, this is Gus's Kite. Gus sure loves his kite. And a storm is building when he's flying the kite at a wedding and not paying any attention. And the kite is gathering all of the furniture while the storm is building and creating this monster in a way. It's just a continually building experience. The song fits this perfectly, as does the crescendo ultimately to the ending here. It's a really cool experience. I can't think of many games where I've ever controlled the flying of a kite before.
This one always, I always kind of dread doing it because it feels like the most broken of all of them. I've had a couple of times playing where it just sort of stops working for a little bit until it decides to finally trigger. But yeah, this is definitely one of the more unique sections of the game. And you also get to flip off your dad, which is always fun.
Yeah, so good. Great moment in that one for sure. So what will I never forget about What Remains of Edith Finch? You could talk about all the different little experiences and how great they are, even if it's like zooming in and taking pictures of different things, or like setting a timer and then having to run your character out behind the camera. Little things like that is great, but it always comes back to the cannery. And it's very Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, like, let's just put it that way. It's so clever. There's a reason it's the one that everyone remembers once you've played the game.
It is very clever. It is very thematically interesting. It's just a really neat section of the game. And I think overall, for me, what will I never forget about What Remains of Edith Finch is honestly the whole thing. It's kind of hard to not just keep in mind the whole game, because again, it is 2 hours long and there's so much of it and all of it is interesting. And the concept of going through this family tree is just really neat, especially in the context of going through these rooms. And one of the most interesting things about the Finch home is that they didn't repurpose bedrooms. They just added more. So it's in that way, the house is also one of the most interesting houses that I've ever explored in a video game. It takes one of the big issues with a lot of amateur made games, or just a lot of games in general, is, to quote Alex Stacey of Loading Ready Run, the people that made this building have never been in a building before. And Edith Finch manages to have that feeling of this building is wrong and should not be this way, while also feeling but it does feel like people lived here. People lived in this house, and you can definitely tell. And I think that a lot of love is put into the design of the Finch house, and I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, especially when you're spit out in the cemetery suddenly. It's oh, okay, and then here's the pet cemetery. Just a lot of really, really interesting moments. And definitely play it in one sitting. I can't imagine this being broken up into more than one sitting. hunker down for a couple hours, really enjoy yourself some Edith Finch.
Yeah.
So to transition to our next game, let's talk about a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's from OC Remix, from YouTube. Someone named Benas Martinonis did his take on the Milton's Tower theme, and it's a neat little take on that unfinished swan melody. So I think you'll enjoy it, because otherwise it's pretty hard to find other Edith Finch songs, let's put it that way. But yes, Milton's Tower, Benas Martinonis' take on this. Please enjoy. We'll be right back.
Alright, so it's time to leave the house. And where do you go when you leave the house? You walk into the woods, obviously. So let's talk about Firewatch, which is a game about walking into the woods forever. Firewatch was originally released for PC and PlayStation 4 on February 9th, 2016. An Xbox One release would follow in September of that same year in North America and Europe, and then October in Australia, as that version was held back due to ratings complications, I guess, for some reason. Can't imagine what that would be, but that's what Campus Center said. It would also be released on Nintendo Switch in December of 2018, so a couple years later. It was developed by Campo Santo and published in a collaboration between them and the company Panic, which, fun fact, after discovering this, I could not share this. Panic is most known for creating like business apps, like data management and stuff like that, and they've also created like MP3 players and stuff like that. They've only published 2 video games in the entire time that their company has existed, since 1997. The other one is 2019's Untitled Goose Game.
That's why their name sounds familiar, yeah.
Those are the only 2 games they have ever published. This and Goose Game. Weird, but neat. Firewatch, much like Edith Finch, is a narrative and exploration-driven first-person adventure game. But instead of taking place in an eccentric house that the player spends a majority of their time in this game, they spend a majority of their time in the wilderness. Specifically, the year is 1989, and the player takes control of a man named Henry, who, after tragedy has struck his life, takes a job as a fire lookout in Wyoming's Shoshone National Forest. There, he is introduced to his supervisor, a woman named Delilah, who communicates with Henry solely through the use of a walkie-talkie. When contacted by her, the player is able to choose how Henry responds, if he responds at all, because, much like other games like this, not responding is in itself a response, and these decisions paint Henry's relationship with Delilah throughout the game. The main goal of the game is simply to go walk around Henry's section of the forest and do the general work that a fire lookout is supposed to do. For instance, one of the first things you have to do is go tell a group of teenage girls that they shouldn't really be setting off fireworks in the forest. That's a bad idea. And the player can keep track of where they are, obviously, by using a map, which, by default, will show the player where they are using an icon. But for anybody that wants a more hardcore, quote, outdoorsy experience, there's an option to turn off this icon so that your navigation relies solely on your skills with a map and compass in-game. Which I didn't use, but I find the fact that exists to be really neat.
And I think you still have to rely on the compass, even if you do have the dot of where you are, because it doesn't show like what direction you're facing, and it can get a little complicated. So yeah, you definitely need the compass.
Yeah. It would be interesting to go back and replay this game without the dot. I would get lost immediately, but it'd be neat, I think. But something odd appears to be happening in the Shoshone National Forest, and Henry and Delilah seem to be the targets of whatever it is. And I gotta figure out what the hell's going on? So this is where I'll ask, Peter, what are your experiences with Firewatch?
Played it for the first time this week. Loved it. Played it in a two sitting. It's like a 4-hour game. So like if you play these two games back to back, 6 hours. Like it's pretty great to just knock out 2 games like that. But you could definitely play it in one sitting if you have a longer extended play time. But yeah, no, this was great. I enjoyed this. I don't know if it'd be on like it might be on my 10 best if I retroactively go back to 2016. 2016 was a weird year of video games, but I enjoyed this. I think I like Edith Finch more as an overall video game experience, but there are some great moments when it comes to the character writing and the interaction between Henry and Delilah. And boy, that prologue is a gut punch. And when you think of like where Camposanto originated from, like, oh yeah, totally checks out and makes sense. But a great experience overall. Especially if you like these kind of first-person narrative adventures. It's good to be in the woods.
I think I agree that as a game, like a full package, I think Edith Finch is a far stronger game. But I cannot deny that I think I like the setting of Firewatch just ever so slightly more, and I like the atmosphere that the woods provide. I am not an outdoorsy person, despite the fact that I am an Eagle Scout and was a Boy Scout for most of my childhood. Not 100% by choice. Camping was never my favorite sort of thing. So going into Virtual Forest, where at the end of the day I get to turn off my PS4 and go get in a real bed, is the next best thing. I played this game back when it first came out in 2016. I remember playing it on my father's massive TV because I had just moved back in with him for a little while. And that was an interesting way to experience that game. I played it in one go, if I remember correctly. And yeah, it's just a really neat game that if you're looking for something to kill some time for like 4 or 5 hours, you can't go wrong with Firewatch. And Henry and Delilah are very memorable characters. At the end of the show, I will ask how you ended up with Delilah in terms of your relationship with her. But we won't get into that until the end. Until then, we got to talk about the development of Firewatch and where the game came from. Because in 2013, Jake Rodkin and Sean Vanneman, as you mentioned, where Camposanto came from and how it makes sense that the game is the way it is, they were working for Telltale Games. Specifically, they were creative leads on The Walking Dead. And after that game was a major success, Vanneman realized that he was, in his own words, getting too comfortable in his role at Telltale and figured that it would be better for his creative motivation if his job incorporated more risk. Not exactly where I would go personally. Well, maybe. I don't know. That does seem like it makes sense as motivation. Because it's like, if you're getting complacent, is your heart really in it? I don't know. It's a weird philosophy to sort of go over in your head. Because I don't think he's wrong to have felt that way. So, as a result, he and Rodkin left the company, and along with the designer of Mark of the Ninja, Nels Anderson, and graphic artist Ollie Moss, they formed Camposanto. Eventually, Jane Ng and Chris Remo also joined the team. Jane was an environmental artist, and Chris Remo is, of course, somebody that we will talk about in more detail later on. So, the aesthetic of Firewatch apparently began with a painting by Moss, and then adapted it into a 3D style. Moss's art was apparently mainly inspired by New Deal advertisements for the National Park Service, as well as official National Park Service iconography. If you don't know what the New Deal is, it's a thing that happened in the 30s. It's what is largely credited for having pulled us out of the Depression, etc., etc. So, ads from that era. The game was developed in Unity, and Jayden apparently didn't really like the tools that the engine had for creating and placing trees. As somebody that has worked with those tools, I agree. And so she took it upon herself to hand model 23 different kinds of tree, and then placed a total of 4,600 trees throughout the game. I love that we have a full count of how many trees are in Firewatch. Of all the little minute details I expected to find, that ain't one of them. Also, the towers in the game, like the watchtowers, were built in accordance to government specifications, even down to using standard lumber size in universe. So they went real hard on details. And one of the things they went hard on details on was to make sure it felt like a real national forest. And to make sure that was the case, the team went on a camping trip to a national park. Though, depending on what article you read, it might say they went to a different national park. Because, as I found out while doing research, the Campo Santo Wikipedia page says they went to Yellowstone National Park, while the Firewatch Wikipedia page says they went to Yosemite National Park. And I was like, am I nuts? Are those the same one? And I just didn't realize it? They're not. Those are different national parks in different parts of the country. Well, not totally different parts of the country. They're both on the West Coast. But, like, maybe they went to both? I don't know. That was the weirdest inconsistency I've ever experienced in this show. But they did camp at a national park, and while they were there, apparently visited a preserved fire lookout that sat 2 miles out from their campsite. So one thing about Firewatch that actually became pretty famous after the game came out, and is one of my favorite things about the behind-the-scenes development of this game, is the method that it uses to make sure that Henry's proportions are right when he looks at a map, for instance, and zooms in on the map. You'd think, oh, the camera just zooms in. No. Shortly after the game came out, modders took the camera and put it in a third-person position and realized that when you are looking at something, Henry's arms and head grow.
Oh.
Into a terrifying Dead Space-style monstrosity. And this is how it handles looking at things. Because, like, it gets the job done. Players aren't supposed to be able to see that. In first person, it looks great. It's a neat hack, but I absolutely love that detail. It is super funny. I remember seeing back when Smash, Wii U, and 3DS was like being hyped. One of the graphics I saw was Henry, and it was, I don't remember what the quote was, but it was Henry, but when he's looking at something, so the like giant armed, giant head model. It's hilarious. I love it.
There's also a story that the guys at Campo Santo were telling of like how Delilah draws Henry at one point if you have a good enough relationship. And like there's something where there's some weird Unity technical workaround that they have to pull together because there are so many different combinations of what's possible.
I do remember that part. That part I found very interesting when I first played. Unity workarounds are so much fun. Unity can do so much cool stuff. It's just you need to be real willing to put in the work to get Unity to do exactly what you want it to do. It's a lot harder to work with than it seems. And yet, is still the most beginner-friendly, widely used engine there is. So, one thing that I found super neat is that the main method of communicating with other people, being the walkie-talkie, and by other people I mean Delilah, that was apparently inspired by two things. First of all, the method itself was inspired by the way that you communicate with Atlas in the game BioShock. So that's neat, and also, works out with something else in Chris Remo's history, which we'll get to in a bit. But it also was inspired by the dialogue system in The Walking Dead, where that's probably where they pulled the idea of silence is a viable response. Originally, though, they did want Henry to be able to interact with people in person, like face-to-face, with several more characters, including hikers and campers. And you do, see a couple of people in Firewatch, but you're always far enough away that you can't actually see their faces. They're blurred, that kind of thing. And this is mainly because they realized that lip-syncing and voicing all of these characters would get crazy expensive. And by doing it almost entirely through walkie-talkie or from a distance, this saved on both of those things, and they were able to put that money elsewhere.
And I feel like it makes for a better experience, honestly. It's better to be isolated. It enhances the relationship you have with Delilah, and it just makes it more one with nature sort of thing.
And speaking of Delilah, while trying to cast for the game, they apparently decided on Cissy Jones as the voice of Delilah very quickly, because they had worked with her in the past, specifically because she voiced 4 characters in The Walking Dead, most notably Katja. And Henry, though, was apparently a much harder character to cast. And eventually they landed on Rich Sommer, who, while looking through his filmography, the main thing that jumped out at me was he was in Mad Men for 80 episodes. So...
Oh, yeah, he sure was. I was just looking at his picture now. Absolutely.
But my favorite part about the actors is that they recorded their lines together via conference call in different studios. And this was obviously meant to make the reading sound more natural. This is a usual thing that voice actors do. They'll record in the same studio so that they can play off of each other's reads. But interestingly, both of them agreed to not meet in person during production so that the distance between their characters would feel more genuine.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It's so good. It's so cool. And it works. It worked out really, really well. So Firewatch was officially announced in March of 2014 with an expected release date of 2015. But in my memory, the game really managed to find wider intrigue when it showed up at Sony's 2015 E3 press conference, which I remember a lot of people reacting to that trailer going what was that? That looked neat. I certainly hadn't heard of it before then. So that's how I remember it, at least. Upon release, Firewatch received generally positive reviews. Its Metacritic scores for its various versions range from a 76 at its lowest, that's the PS4 version, to an 87 at its highest, which is the Switch version. I believe the Switch released as the most optimized version of the game up to that point.
Yeah, PS4 had some rough technical issues at launch.
The game's art and characters were the main praises for these reviews, as was the atmosphere and setting, obviously, though many reviewers and players found the ending to be slightly disappointing in the long run, which I'm kind of there, but also I also kind of like the ending. I don't know. It's a really weird, conflicting thing.
It's a kind of that's life ending.
Within a month, the game had sold over 5,000 copies, and by the end of 2016 had sold over 1 million copies. And by 2018, the game had sold over 2.5 million copies across all 4 platforms. Like I mentioned before, Firewatch was nominated for several rewards and distinctions across the industry, and it was the winner of a good chunk of them, including Best 3D Visual Experience at the Unity Awards 2016, Best Indie Game at the Golden Joystick Awards, Best Writing on PC Gamer's Best of 2016 list, Game of the Year from Polygon, Best Independent Game of 2016 on PlayStation Blog, Best Debut and Best Narrative at the Game Developers Choice Awards, Best Performance in a Drama Lead for Rich Sommer as Henry, Writing in a Drama, and Original Adventure Game at the National Academy of Video Game Trade Reviewers. It won Best Debut Game and Best Performer for Cissy Jones as Delilah at the BAFTAs. It won Best Storytelling at the Edge Awards, and Even alongside all of that, it was nominated for 6 DICE Awards and had 5 nominations at the Game Awards, though it did not walk away with any wins from either of those events. Since release, Firewatch and Campo Santo have had a few bumps in the road and interesting happenings that have gone on with them. In 2016, Campo Santo announced that they had partnered with the film production company Good Universe to produce a film based on Firewatch, though, as is often the case, when we bring up deals to make like smaller video games or even bigger video games into films, nothing has been heard about this adaptation since.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, personally, don't think Firewatch would make all that good a movie, but that's just me. I think it fits best as a game. Also, in 2016, the Ford Motor Company released an ad template for their dealerships that featured an image that very closely resembled promotional art for Firewatch, which led to controversy and many dealerships apologizing as they had no control over the planning of the advertisement. I remember this, actually. I remember seeing some of the devs tweet about it.
I definitely remember this as being part of a rival Michigan automotive company.
In 2017, after a notable YouTuber used a racial slur during a stream of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, Sean Vanneman tweeted that he planned to perform a DMCA takedown against any Firewatch content the YouTuber in question had produced, and as a result, Firewatch was review bombed on Steam. Stupid reason to review bomb a game, but whatever. But also, that's not a tool you want to make use of, but it's gray area, it's weird. And then, I'm going to bring us down for a second, because I had forgotten about this, and then when I relearned it, I was bummed out.
I sure didn't, because I'm like, oh, what is Campo Santo? Oh, that's right, this, yep, mm-hmm.
At the Game Awards 2017, the reveal trailer for Campo Santo's next game, In the Valley of Gods, was unveiled. However, in 2018, the company was acquired by Valve, and Campo Santo began assisting with the development of Half-Life Alyx. Soon after, journalists noticed that multiple Campo Santo devs had quietly removed In the Valley of Gods from their social media profiles, and also that the game had been removed from Campo Santo's website, and the original reveal trailer had been made private. Jake Rodkin has since said that the game is merely on hold, but many fans unfortunately consider it effectively canceled. I don't think if a game is merely on hold, I feel like you don't remove it from all your social stuff.
Yeah, Valve took over.
From the sound of it, what happened was Valve has a very you can work on whatever you want philosophy when it comes to development. They're very famous for this. Famous might not be the right word. They're very infamous for this. That's why a lot of the games that people want from Valve don't happen. Because unless somebody at Valve wants to make that game, they don't have to. And according to Rodkin, most of Campo Santo's devs sort of spread out to go work on Half-Life or Dota or Steam. And that's just how it went. So maybe one day we'll see this game, but I don't think we will.
It's unfortunate. In the Valley of the Gods looked really cool.
I agree it did. It was like exploring ruins, like ancient ruins. It looked rad. In the desert, it looked cool. But anyways, let's get off of that sad train, and let's talk about the composer for Firewatch. His name is Chris Remo. He was mentioned as one of the testers on What Remains of Edith Finch. So, that's a really cool connection that I didn't realize existed. So, little background info. Not only is Chris Remo the composer for Firewatch, but he also served as a writer and designer on the game. He was born September 10th, 1984 in San Francisco, California, and he actually began his career as a games journalist. He wrote for the website Adventure Gamers, and eventually he and colleagues from that site would create the website Idle Thumbs. After Idle Thumbs ended, Remo would go on to be editor-in-chief at Shack News, and later became editor-at-large of Gamasutra, where he revived Idle Thumbs as a podcast alongside writer Nick Brecken and, hey, Jake Rodkin, who at the time was, of course, working at Telltale Games. In 2010, he left Gamasutra and became the community manager for BioShock developer Irrational Games. So there's where the BioShock connection comes in, where he ended Idle Thumbs once again. The show was then revived again in 2012 via a Kickstarter campaign, now being hosted by Remo, Rodkin, and, hey, Sean Vanneman. So there you go, almost all of Campo Santo on that one podcast. During this time, he had also joined Double Fine Productions, where he did a variety of work on many of their games, including Psychonauts, Space Base DF9, and The Cave. These contributions ranged from testing to composing to designing and writing. He currently still works with Campo Santo, now under the umbrella of Valve, where he most recently contributed to the development of Half-Life Alyx. As for his discography, this is specifically the ones he was composer of. He was the composer for Drawn to Life, the next chapter on the Wii, 30 Flights of Loving, which was actually, I believe, a Kickstarter perk, a game that was a Kickstarter perk for that Idle Thumbs Kickstarter, as far as I could tell. Space Base DF9, which was one of the Double Fine games that he contributed to, and Gone Home. So we would have been talking about Chris Remo either way. So a little bit of historical research into the Firewatch score itself. Originally, the first chapter of the game was supposed to feature the song Tell It to My Heart by Taylor Dane. In fact, that's what song was being used as a placeholder while developing the scene. But Vanneman realized that that song was too overwhelming and would also cost far too much to license for use in the game. So Remo went out to find an 80s style song by an unsigned independent artist, and he actually found two artists by the name of Joy Chun and Nate Bosley, and licensed their song Push Play to be featured in this chapter. As for the score of the game itself, it includes both electric and acoustic guitar, as well as bass and electric piano, and all of the instruments are being played by Remo himself.
Oh, that's really cool. That's awesome.
So, let's get into those 5 critical tracks, shall we? And there's no place that we can start other than at the very beginning. Let's talk about Prologue. People don't talk about the prologue of Firewatch nearly as much as they should.
Ooh.
It is incredibly well done. It is a text-only story that basically tells you why Henry is where he is and what happened to him before the events of the game. And it, from the start, leaves a pretty hard impact just immediately. And I think that this simple piece playing in the background really kind of drives home the tone that the sequence is trying to convey, which is mainly one of melancholy and kind of just feeling lost. It's a really good piece for an incredible intro to a game.
Yeah, it takes 5 minutes and you're just making choices. Don't worry, they don't ultimately mean much. It's just trying to get a backstory going for your Henry. And one of the most critical choices, obviously, of that, did you choose Bucket the Beagle or Mayhem the German Shepherd?
Probably Bucket the Beagle. I prefer smaller dogs.
Bucket for life. Bucket's the real answer.
I'm not big on German Shepherds. I mean, I love them. They're great. They're still dogs at the end of the day, but I'll take a beagle any day. It's one of those moments that, despite not having played the game for 4 years now, that prologue really sticks with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if you're going to end up in the woods in that Shoshone forest, something's had to have happened.
Pretty much. Critical track number 2 is Stay in Your Tower and Watch. The name of this track is actually a reference to Delilah's final line in the game's reveal trailer in 2014, and in fact, this happens to also be the song that played during that trailer as well. Honestly, this song is incredibly my thing. It is melancholy, it is mysterious, sometimes feels slightly sinister, it's got a lot of acoustic guitar to it, and honestly, I think this song is a pretty good, quote-unquote, vertical slice of this is the tone to expect from Firewatch overall.
Yeah, especially in the clip here where it's like, it's a little upper beat. It's, kind of closer to the end of the clip. So it's got a crescendo a little bit. But yeah, it's really neat in the way that they add these sort of accent complementary notes to add that little bit of tension. Like it's not, pure chords. It's just that little bit of something's off. As you said, something mysterious, something sinister. So it does a really good job of that. It's not just, playing it straight, but there's a little tweak to it.
Yeah. After that, we have critical track number 3. It is Camp Approach. For some reason, upon re-listening to the soundtrack of this game, this is the song that stuck out to me the most as, oh, I remember this playing a lot. Or at least like the leitmotif I remember happening a good amount. The melody in general just sort of sticks to you, though I can't fully recall when it played. Judging by the name, if I had to guess, it's probably when you're going up to the campsite of the teenage girls who had been playing with fireworks the day before, so you can make sure that they're not burning down the forest. And then what you find is a bit more surprising than fireworks. And I don't know, I think this song is just really good.
I think that's pretty accurate, because I was definitely trying to learn how to use the compass and navigate properly. So I was hearing this one a lot too. This is one where it's like, I heard it and it's like, oh yeah, this is definitely one that had to be here for sure. And it definitely, I think this gives a good feel of like what it's like to explore. And again, so much of the exploration is just natural sound. But then when you're like on the right track and the music's coming in, like, you're on the right path, and it's a good feeling, and you resonate with the melody well.
Mm-hmm. And then for something 100% completely different. Critical track number 4 is Exfiltration. This is a Metal Gear song. Am I wrong there? Am I wrong to say that? This is a Metal Gear song. Like older Metal Gear, not modern, but
pretty accurate. Or even like an MGS5. You can see that. Yeah, it's stealth all the way.
even though there is no stealth in this game, it's not a stealth sequence, though it does hold, like, the part that this plays in feels like it could become a stealth sequence at any moment.
Yes.
It's got, like, this mystery and this, like, sinister tone to it, because this song plays when you are in a surveillance camp that Henry has discovered that somebody, possibly the government, has set up in the forest. And then Henry discovers that they've been eavesdropping on him and Delilah's conversations over the radio. And things get kind of uneasy at that point. They've been uneasy before, but this is the most uneasy they've been. It is a totally different feeling from the rest of the Critical 5. It is so good. A lot of people, when Firewatch first came out, were like, is this game about aliens? Are aliens going to show up? Is it going to be like Ghosts? No, it's not Ghosts or aliens. It's much more grounded than that. And honestly, still pretty well done in that case. But this game really knows when to make you feel uneasy and unsafe in the woods. And this song is a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, and it's not too often that they play on that tension, but the soundtrack plays it perfectly.
Mm-hmm. And last, but 100% not least, on the Critical 5, it is track number 5, Old Shoshone.
I'm headed off to Old Shoshone, where the birds and the bees won't know me. Man and war won't exist no more, and there ain't no gals to keep no score. I'm taking off for the woods, to a place where there ain't no shirts. Don't need no books or ponds or the ponderosas. Don't need no lady or marry the Mariposas. Can't waste no time in getting there.
I could have sworn in my head, and granted this is just from listening to the soundtrack and then like thinking through memories of playing Firewatch, I figured this was the credits song. It's not. I'm glad I went and looked it up to make sure. The actual credits song in the game is I'd Rather Go Blind by Etta James. It's a pretty good song. But then I was like, wait, then where does this song play? And I learned that it is just a song you can find on a tape. It is the culmination of the Ron and Dave storyline in the game. And it's completely missable, and it's the best song in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's such a good song. It is one of those songs where if I knew guitar, I would probably at least try and learn it. But alas, my life didn't work out that way, so I don't know how to play guitar. At least not now. I love the lyrics of this song. My favorite line is if you're wondering where's my ass been, it's been cavorting among the aspens. That is an award-winning line.
Yeah.
And it's this song is fantastic and just really heartfelt.
Yeah, and it's great to think of, it's Remo playing and singing this. Like that's a great touch. But yeah, I missed it. And it was one of those things like I watched a couple interviews and it's like, oh yeah, you can find this and it's the end of the storyline that you get letters back and forth between these two guys. And it's like they find these lyrics somewhere in the woods and are like, this is what it would be like if I'm going to pick up my guitar and record this and just come up with it on the spot. Like it's a really cool thing. Yeah, best song for sure.
So on the cutting room floor, you've got 2. Hit me.
So my first track for cutting room floor will be Something's Wrong. And so it's kind of like the beginning of that conspiracy leitmotif that Exfiltration really dives into. But this is where not only the player, but me as well, was just like, oh, something's not right when Henry returns to his lookout on like the first big day on his first big hike to discover that the lookout's been broken into. And then you get the boom, 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 wow. Like, it's like, all right, soundtrack, you're doing some cool things. It was on a listen to this soundtrack. It's like, oh yeah, I really like this. I know it's kind of similar to Exfiltration, but it's like the foundation, the fundamentals of it.
Every time I think about somebody being in your tower, I just remember that, the PlayStation trailer of the, hey, I found the wire, it's cut. What? I'm here, I'm looking at the wire, it's been cut through. You're already there? You're not in your tower? No. Then who is?
Oh, such a good moment too. Oh my goodness. Yeah, just really, really cool things that did. But yeah, was it those girls? What are they up to now? And then the second one on my cutting room floor is Canyon Sunset. Just a super calming and relaxing piece. Cannot be said enough how great the lighting is in this game. How the forest can look totally different at different times of the day. Playing up big colors. Just drastic differences there. And it's gorgeous. A great art style. And it's amplified and like distilled in a dynamic theme for PlayStation 4. And so this track plays on that PS4 dynamic theme, which is one of the best themes that the system has to offer.
For me, I also have two tracks. The first one is Beartooth Point. There's another one of those that while listening, I was like, yeah, I remember hearing this quite a bit. When it really picks up, I feel like it's really bringing across the danger of the forest, but it also sort of has this feeling of awe and beauty that comes with the fact that you are in a national park, and being that it's called Beartooth Point, I'm going to imagine it's also a spot with a hell of a view. And track number 2, I have North Backcountry. This one also feels kind of different from other songs in the game in a weird way. It starts more electronic than a lot of the other stuff, but then it does bring in the guitar, so it comes a little bit closer in line to what you might expect from this game. But I think this song feels a lot more peaceful than the others. It sort of cuts through that mystery and melancholy just a little bit, and it just sort of feels a lot more, like you're comfortable where you are at this point. At least at this exact moment. I don't know, that's always the vibe I sort of got from this song.
Yeah, life is good, nature's beautiful, takes your mind off your problems.
So, what will I never forget about Firewatch? That prologue really sticks with you. Again, it's been 4 years since I played, and I still remember that prologue hitting like a sack of bricks. And also just the way that Henry and Delilah interact really causes you to get attached to the characters. So this is where I will ask, how did your relationship with Delilah end up?
Developed super well. Like they can get along really well, and like it's an intoxicating back and forth where like you're eager to reach out to her and hear what she has to say, and she's eager to hear from you, and like it's all good vibes, but the game's gonna end the way it does, no matter what. So, yeah, I got on real good terms with Delilah until the ending.
See, for me, Henry and Delilah fell in love. And they were planning something near the end, at least, which obviously didn't happen because of the way the game ends. But yeah, it's just those two characters are done so well and are played so well by their actors that they really stick with you after a while. I think if you are interested in playing a game that has very good like character development throughout and a very good representation of how two people grow close to each other, Firewatch is a pretty good choice for that. Also, it's a very pretty game. It's a very, very pretty game.
Yeah, definitely one for the desktop wallpaper. I'm really glad I got to play it this week. It's like, I played EDITH FINCH before, and like, it's 4 hours. What's 4 hours for Firewatch? I already own it on PC. I'm really glad I played it.
I think I'll probably buy it on Switch at some point to give it another go. Maybe for independent study. That sounds like a fun independent study. Who knows?
So yeah, how was that for a walking simulator week? So yeah, I think it's definitely a games where it's big on atmosphere and all that, but these songs come in at just the right times. And I think if you've played the games, they leave your mark on you. I'd be interested to hear what people think about, if you haven't played those games and what you think of these soundtracks. But yeah, hopefully it inspires you to give these games a try because they're both special. And that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at Thodobaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also at rhymeswithasia.com. But it's that MP3 podcast version that you want over on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where you can find Joe's other podcast, Smasterpieces. Then you can find us not only on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts, also on Spotify with the podcast feed, but also on Spotify. There is a Spotify playlist where if we've talked about songs from video games on this show, it's gonna go in that Spotify playlist if it's on Spotify, even retroactively, like Tetris Effect. Anything else getting added this week, Joe?
Both of these games are on Spotify, so both soundtracks are heading to the playlist.
Perfect. And then you can catch us on social media at Soundchat OST for feedback on how we're doing and also suggestions on games that you'd like us to cover in the future. Bonus tracks. We got a couple things in the hopper. We were making progress. Now that the semester's over, we can push on forward. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Masayoshi Soken.
I will be talking about Yasunori Nishiki. Oh yes. You know what games those are. It's going to be a very, very fun week on Original Soundchat. Well, Joe, let's play us out.
So obviously I needed a cover of Old Shoshone. First of all, I don't think I'd be able to find anything else. Second of all, that's the song I'd want a cover of anyways, even if I could find anything else. And I managed to find a great cover by YouTuber Pancho and Concerto. That's PANCHOENCONCIERTO. It is very important to me that you can spell that because not only is the cover great, but you should go watch the video for a little fun treat at the beginning that I consider very much worth it. So yeah, please enjoy Pancho and Concerto and his cover of Old Shoshone. Bye.
Absolutely. Definitely worth checking out the full YouTube video. Thanks so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Headed off to Old Shoshone, where the birds and the bees won't know me. Man o' war don't exist no more, and there ain't no gals to keep no score. I'm taking off for the world.